In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We all know that line. It's one of the most famous warnings in American history, delivered by a five-star general right as he was leaving the presidency. But what if I told you it wasn't his only warning? And that his other predictions, the ones we don't talk about, are even more critical for us to understand right now? Because beyond the weapons and the armies, Eisenhower saw another storm gathering. A storm that could reshape our society, our politics, and even our grip on reality. To make sense of our turbulent present, we have to look back and listen to his full, unheeded warning. Picture it. January 17, 1961. The world is locked in the Cold War. The US and the Soviet Union are in a nuclear standoff that could end civilization. And on television, the oldest president the country had seen up to that point, Dwight D. Eisenhower, is about to hand power to the youngest ever elected, John F. Kennedy. And this isn't just any president. This is Eisenhower, the supreme commander who led the Allies on D-Day, a man who spent nearly his whole life in the military. And he uses his final moments in the Oval Office not to brag about his victories, but to deliver a solemn warning to the American people. The context here is everything. Imagine a world-renowned doctor warning you about the dangers of modern medicine. Eisenhower wasn't some anti-war protester. He was a key architect of the very system he was now telling everyone to watch out for. He'd spent 8 years as president building up America's military might to deter the Soviet Union. But in doing that, he saw he'd helped create new, permanent centers of power in America. Forces that worked outside the normal democratic process. He felt a duty to warn the nation, and his speech wasn't just a goodbye. It was a profound act of civic duty. Let's start with the part of the speech we all remember. The military-industrial complex. What did he even mean by that? He called it the conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry. Before World War II, America didn't really have a permanent arms industry, but the Cold War changed everything. It created a forever relationship between the Pentagon and the corporations that supply it. It's a loop where both sides benefit. The military gets advanced weapons, and the industry gets paid handsomely to make them. But Eisenhower's real fear was about the third party in this relationship. You, me, the American taxpayer, and democracy itself. He warned this combination could gain unwarranted influence in government. So, how did that warning turn out? Today, the scale of this complex is almost hard to comprehend. In 2024, global military spending soared to $2.7 trillion, the biggest jump in a single year since the Cold War ended. The United States alone spent nearly $1 trillion, more than the next 9 countries combined. That money flows to a handful of massive defense contractors. In 2022, just the top 5 of these U.S. contractors spent over $64 million on lobbying. This creates a really powerful, and some would say dangerous, incentive. When your economy is so deeply tied to making weapons, and lobbyists have that much influence, you have to ask, do we go to war because it's necessary, or because it's profitable? Critics argue this dynamic pushes us toward military solutions instead of diplomacy, feeding conflicts that might serve corporate interests more than our actual national security. Eisenhower's fear wasn't that the military was evil, but that the business of war could become so powerful it would find reasons to keep going, risking the very freedoms it was supposed to protect. But here's the thing. This is where most people stop when they talk about Eisenhower's speech. And by stopping there, they miss his other, and maybe even more prophetic, warning. In the very next paragraph, he pivots. He says, akin to, and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture, has been the technological revolution. He saw that research was no longer the work of a lone inventor tinkering in a garage. It had become centralized, complicated, and incredibly expensive. And who was the biggest funder? the federal government. This, he warned, created a brand new kind of danger. First, he worried that the prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment meant that intellectual curiosity could be pushed aside in the hunt for government contracts, that scientists would start agreeing with the official story rather than challenging it. But then he delivers the real gut punch. He warns that we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite. Does that sound familiar? Today, we don't just have a scientific technological elite. We live inside the world they built. A handful of trillion-dollar tech companies don't just influence policy, they shape our reality. They control the platforms where we get news, argue about politics, and form our opinions. Their founders are treated like global leaders, often with more influence than the people we actually elect. The danger Eisenhower saw was that this elite, driven by its own goals, could wield immense power with zero accountability. When policy on everything from pandemics to climate change to AI is shaped by a small circle of specialists and tech giants whose interests are really being served? Eisenhower wasn't anti-science. He was profoundly pro-democracy. He was warning that if the public is cut out of policy decisions because they're too technical, then it's not really a public policy at all. It's easy to hear all this and think of the speech as a prophecy of doom, but that wasn't his point. The warnings were just obstacles he saw on the path to a much bigger goal: peace. This is the forgotten heart of his message. The man who planned D-Day spent his entire presidency haunted by the thought of another world war. He once said that another war could utterly destroy this civilization. His goal was to find a way for nations to compose differences, not with arms, but with intellect and decent purpose. In another famous speech, he laid out the real cost of the arms race with chilling clarity. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This wasn't a call for weakness. Eisenhower believed in a strong defense, but he saw military power as a means to an end, and that end was creating a world where we didn't need it anymore. He called for disarmament and international cooperation, believing America's real strength was in its commitment to human dignity. In an age of escalating global conflicts, this part of his message feels more urgent than ever. He was pleading for balance between preparing for war and actually trying to build a lasting peace. So if we're facing these two powerful forces, the military-industrial complex and the scientific-technological elite, what's the solution? How do we stop this disastrous rise of misplaced power? Eisenhower gives a clear answer. It isn't a new law or a new political party. The solution is us. He says, only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals. This is the final piece of his warning, and it's arguably the most important. For Eisenhower, the ultimate check on all this power is a public that's paying attention, a public that's informed, and a public that's engaged. He knew these powerful groups thrive in the shadows, counting on the issues being too complex and the numbers too big for the average person to care. But in an age of rampant misinformation and algorithms designed to feed us what we want to hear, not what we need to know, is an alert and knowledgeable citizenry even possible anymore? And maybe that's his biggest challenge to us today. He puts the responsibility for the future of the Republic right on our shoulders. It's our job to demand transparency, to question authority, and to hold our leaders accountable. It's our duty to make sure that our security and our liberty can prosper together. Eisenhower's farewell address is astonishingly prescient. It's a warning about unchecked military spending, the quiet rise of tech elites, and the danger of sacrificing our future for our own convenience. But it wasn't meant to be a prophecy of doom. It was a call to action. It's a reminder that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires our constant vigilance and our active participation. The forces he warned us about haven't gone away. They're more powerful and more intertwined than he could have ever imagined. But his final words weren't a prediction of failure. They were an expression of faith. Faith in the American people to navigate these challenges and to choose a future of peace and liberty. That faith and that responsibility now belongs to us. Which of Eisenhower's warnings do you think is most relevant today? The military-industrial complex or the scientific-technological elite? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing for more reflections on the history that shapes our world. Thank you for watching.